Picture this: two men, one basketball, and a hatred so deep, so personal, so absolutely unhinged that it didn't just define a decade of basketball. It rewired the entire DNA of the sport. We're not talking about trash talk. We're not talking about hard fouls. We're talking about punches, suspensions, rule changes, death threats. A rivalry so vicious that the NBA, the same league that lets guys flop like dying fish for a foul, looked at what was happening and said, "Okay, we need to step in." And the crazy part, most people only know half the story. Today, we're going inside the full thing. The blood, the beef, the basketball, and the moments that most people are too scared to talk about. I've spent years obsessing over NBA history, breaking down rivalries, feuds, and the stories the highlight reels leave out. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you're going to look at this rivalry completely differently. We're covering the top 9 most insane moments and facts from the most brutal rivalry in NBA history. And I'm not ranking these by how famous they are. I'm ranking them by how wild they actually were when you know the full context. We're starting at number 9 down to number 1, and trust me, number 1 is going to hit different than you expect. Let's get into it. Number 9, the rivalry that wasn't supposed to exist here.
What you make that ill, nigga? What you make that ill, nigga? What you make that ill, nigga?
Here's something nobody talks about at the start of this story. The Bad Boy Pistons and the Chicago Bulls were never supposed to be rivals. In the beginning, Detroit was a dynasty. 3 finals appearances, 2 championships. Isaiah Thomas was the king, Bill Laimbeer was the enforcer, and the Pistons had built one of the most physical, calculated, and flat-out nasty teams the league had ever seen. Chicago had Michael Jordan. One guy, one breathtaking, jaw-dropping, highlight reel guy surrounded by a roster that was, frankly, pretty average. The league expected the Pistons to just keep winning, and the Bulls were supposed to be the annual speed bump on the way to another Pistons title. But then something weird happened. Chicago kept getting better, and Detroit kept getting meaner. Because here's the thing about great teams that are threatened: they don't get nervous, they get dirty. And that is exactly when the Jordan rules were born. If you don't know what the Jordan rules are, buckle up, because this is where the rivalry stops being about basketball and starts being about survival. The Pistons drew up a specific defensive scheme, literally documented, literally named, designed to physically punish Michael Jordan every single time he touched the ball. Hit him going left, hit him going right. If he drives, foul him hard. If he jumps, foul him harder. Make every single basket feel like a car accident. This wasn't a scouting report. This was a bounty. And the crazy part, it worked. For 3 straight years, the Pistons knocked Chicago out of the playoffs. 3 straight years. But here's what the Pistons didn't account for: you can slow Michael Jordan down. You cannot break him. And that leads us straight into number 8. Number 8. The year Michael Jordan started going to the gym at 5 a.m. just to beat one team.
What you make that ill, nigga? 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 What you make that ill?
Let me paint you a picture of obsession. After getting knocked out by Detroit in 1989, Michael Jordan did something that even his teammates described as frightening. He became singularly, completely, almost irrationally obsessed with beating the Pistons. Not the league, not a championship, the Pistons.
Markiplier hits the first bandit shot. If you can't get down inside.
He hired a personal trainer, Tim Grover, and started a weight training program specifically designed to let him absorb the physical punishment Detroit was delivering. He added 15 pounds of muscle. He changed his game. He changed his body. Scottie Pippen once said that during that period, Michael's focus on Detroit wasn't basketball focus. It was personal. It was like watching someone prepare for a war. And here's the analogy that puts it perfectly. You know how in action movies the hero gets beaten in Act 1, goes away, trains in the mountains, comes back completely transformed. That was Michael Jordan, except real, except in Chicago. Except the mountain was a weight room and the sensei was a guy named Tim who made him do ungodly amounts of lifting. The Pistons had built a wall. Jordan built a battering ram. And what makes this rivalry brutal, truly brutal, isn't just the physical stuff. It's the psychological warfare. Isaiah Thomas once said in an interview casually, almost dismissively, that he didn't consider Michael Jordan a true team player. That Jordan was selfish. That Chicago would never win a championship because of it. Jordan didn't forget that. And that memory is exactly what makes number 7 one of the coldest moments in NBA history. Number 7, the moment Isaiah Thomas refused to shake Michael Jordan's hand.
What you make that ill, nigga? Wait, what you make that ill, nigga? Wait, what you make that ill, nigga? Hey, sweat, boom, great.
1991 NBA playoffs, Eastern Conference Finals. The Bulls finally beat the Pistons. Finally. After 3 years of physical abuse, dirty tactics, and psychological warfare, Chicago won. The Pistons, in a move that shocked even their own fans, walked off the court without shaking hands. Isaiah Thomas, Bill Laimbeer, Dennis Rodman, all of them just left. Didn't congratulate Chicago, didn't acknowledge the moment, just walked into the tunnel like ghosts. The league was furious. The media was furious. Fans were furious. But here's the twist nobody talks about enough. Years later, when Isaiah Thomas was left off the 1992 Dream Team roster, fingers pointed straight at Michael Jordan. The claim was that Jordan told USA Basketball he wouldn't play if Isaiah was on the team. Jordan never confirmed it. He never denied it either. He just smiled that smile. The one that means he knows exactly what he did and he wants you to know he knows. Whether it's true or not, the story tells you everything about this rivalry. This wasn't two teams competing. This was two forces colliding. And when forces that strong clash, people get left out of Olympics teams. Now at this point, you might be thinking, okay, this is spicy, but where does it get really brutal? Oh, we're getting there. Because number 6 is where the actual violence starts. Number 6, Bill Laimbeer, the most hated man in basketball history, and he was proud of it.
Wait, what you make that ill, nigga? Wait, what you make that ill, nigga? Wait, what you make that ill, nigga?
Let's talk about Bill Laimbeer for a second, because to understand this rivalry, you need to understand this man. Bill Laimbeer was not a great basketball player by conventional standards. He wasn't the most athletic. He wasn't the most talented. But he was, without question, one of the most effective dirty players who ever lived. His specialty, the late foul, the elbow that comes after the whistle, the hip check that's just barely inside the line of a flagrant, the stuff that makes players furious but is just clean enough to avoid ejection. Larry Bird once called Laimbeer the dirtiest player he'd ever faced. Coming from a man who played in one of the most physical eras in NBA history, that is not a compliment. That is a warning label. What made Laimbeer particularly maddening was his complete lack of shame. He would foul you, look at the referee like you did something wrong, and then go shoot 80% from the free throw line while the crowd booed him into the shadow realm. He once said in an interview, and I need you to understand this is a real quote from a real human, "I don't care if people hate me. My job is to win, not to be liked." The Bulls hated him. Fans around the league hated him. And he absolutely, completely did not care. He was the enforcer of the Jordan rules. He was the reason Michael Jordan needed 15 extra pounds of muscle. And he was the reason that when Detroit finally started losing to Chicago, the whole thing felt like watching a supervillain get defeated. But if Laimbeer was the enforcer, number 5 is about the guy who made the whole machine run. Number 5, Isaiah Thomas and the psychology of organized chaos.
Wait, what you make that hill, nigga? Wait, what you make that hill, nigga?
Before we keep going, if you're enjoying this breakdown, hit subscribe. We drop deep dive basketball stories like this every week, and the next one is going to be even more unhinged than this one. Back to Isaiah. Isaiah Thomas is one of the most complicated figures in NBA history, and this rivalry is the reason why. On one hand, he's a Hall of Famer, a 2-time champion, one of the greatest point guards to ever touch a basketball. When you watch footage of him playing, it's beautiful. He was crafty, smart, magnetic, and genuinely thrilling. On the other hand, he built and ran a team that operated like a mob enforcement crew. He wasn't just a player on the Pistons. He was the architect of everything Detroit did to Chicago. The Jordan rules were his idea. The walk-off was his call. The physical intimidation was his culture. And here's the analogy that explains Isaiah Thomas perfectly. You know how in heist movies, there's always the guy who's charming, brilliant, funny to be around, but also the guy who came up with the entire plan and will absolutely throw you under a bus if the plan requires it. That's Isaiah. The Bulls respected his game. They despised his tactics. And what's wild is that decades later, Thomas has been somewhat rehabilitated in the public eye. People appreciate the Bad Boys era for what it was. But the players who lived through it, still not over it. Michael Jordan famously still refuses to call Isaiah Thomas a friend. At their respective Hall of Fame ceremonies, they were nothing but polite distance. 20 years later, still cold. But here's what blew this entire rivalry from intense to completely unhinged. It wasn't just Jordan versus Isaiah. There was a third character in this story who arrived late and made everything way more complicated. Number 4 is about Dennis Rodman and the moment he switched sides. Number 4, Dennis Rodman, the man who played for both sides and somehow made both hate him.
What you make that hill, nigga? Wait, what you make that hill, nigga? Hey, sweat,
If this rivalry were a movie, Dennis Rodman would be the character that makes everyone in the theater go, wait, what? Rodman played for the Pistons during their dynasty years. He was their defensive weapon. He was one of the key reasons the Jordan rules worked, because Rodman was the kind of defender who made basketball feel like a contact sport from a different century. He was physical. He was relentless. He was weird in ways that had nothing to do with basketball. The hair, the personality, the absolute unpredictability. And then, after the Pistons era ended, Dennis Rodman became a Chicago Bull. He joined Michael Jordan's team. The man who spent years making Jordan's life a living nightmare was now his teammate. The basketball world collectively lost its mind. And here's where it gets interesting. Jordan and Rodman, against all logic, against all history, actually made it work. Rodman became one of the best teammates Jordan ever had. He brought the same physicality, the same defensive aggression, but now it was pointed at other teams. Jordan once said that Rodman was the most unique player he ever played with. High praise from someone who played with Scottie Pippen. But the Pistons veterans, they never forgave Rodman. As far as they were concerned, he was a traitor. The brotherhood of the Bad Boys was sacred, and Rodman had sold it for a championship with the enemy. This is the moment where the rivalry stops being about two teams and becomes about identity, about loyalty, about what happens when the lines between villain and hero get completely blurred, which leads perfectly to number 3, and the moment things got physically dangerous. Number 3, when the games stopped being games.
Wait, what you make that hill, nigga? Wait, what you make that hill, nigga? Wait, what you make.
We've talked about dirty fouls and psychological warfare. Now let's talk about the moments where this rivalry crossed a line that even the players acknowledged was too far. During the peak years of Bulls versus Pistons, the games were borderline unwatchable for the faint of heart. Every drive to the basket by Jordan was treated like a military exercise by Detroit. Laimbeer would hit you. Rodman would hit you. Rick Mahorn, who had arms like a defensive lineman, would hit you again just to make sure. In one particularly brutal sequence during a 1990 playoff game, Jordan absorbed hit after hit after hit driving to the basket and kept getting up. It became almost mythological, like watching someone walk through a wall repeatedly. But the moment that crystallized everything happened off the court. Scottie Pippen, who had grown under the physical pressure of facing Detroit, got into a confrontation that nearly became a full brawl. Players from both sides had to be separated. Coaches were involved. The arena went silent in the way arenas only go silent when everyone present realizes this might actually escalate past sport. The league reviewed it. Warnings were issued. The term flagrant foul, which barely existed as a serious enforcement mechanism before this era, started being defined and applied more strictly because of what was happening in these games. Detroit invented the punishment. Chicago's survival of it forced the NBA to create the rules that protect players today. Think about that. The brutality of this rivalry literally changed how the rulebook is written. And now we're at the top three, which means we're getting to the moments most people have heard of but almost nobody understands the full context of. Number 2 is the one that ended it all. Number 2, the last game, a dynasty's final bow, and the most graceless exit in playoff history.
Wait, what you made that hill, nigga? Wait, what you made that hill, nigga? Wait.
1991, Game 4, Eastern Conference Finals. Chicago leads the series 3-0. The Pistons are done. Everyone knows it, they know it. Jordan knows it. The referee scoring the game knows it. With time winding down and the Bulls about to close out the series, something happened that became one of the most debated moments in NBA history. The Pistons, led by Isaiah Thomas, began substituting their starters out of the game. Standard practice when a game is decided, right? Except they didn't acknowledge the Bulls. No handshakes, no acknowledgement of the crowd, no moment of sportsmanship. They walked off the court while the game was still technically in progress. Not after the buzzer, before it. The broadcast showed Bulls players standing on the court, some of them visibly confused, some visibly angry, as the Pistons just disappeared into the tunnel like a team that had already decided to act like this game, this series. This defeat hadn't happened. To Pistons fans, it was defiance, a refusal to bow, a we're leaving on our terms energy. To everyone else, it was sore loser behavior of the highest order. The image of that walkout is burned into NBA history, and it perfectly encapsulates everything this rivalry was: nasty, personal, proud, and unwilling to give an inch even when giving an inch was the only civilized thing left to do. But for all of that, for everything we've covered, number 1 isn't about a game. It isn't about a walkout or a punch or a rule change. Number 1 is about what this rivalry created, what it built, the thing that makes it, objectively, the most important rivalry in the history of the sport. Number 1, the real legacy. This rivalry didn't just produce champions. It built the template for modern basketball.
Wait, what you made that hill, nigga? Wait, what you made that hill, nigga? Wait, what you made that hill, nigga?
Here's the thing nobody says out loud, but every serious basketball historian knows. Without the Pistons, there is no Michael Jordan as we know him. Not the champion, not the icon, not the 6 rings, not the last dance, not the $3 billion brand, not Space Jam. None of it. Because what the Pistons rivalry did through 3 years of absolute brutality was forge Michael Jordan into something beyond talented. It made him obsessed. It made him relentless. It turned an unbelievable basketball player into a winner who would do anything to never feel that loss again. The Jordan rules didn't stop him. They created the version of him that couldn't be stopped. And beyond Jordan specifically, this rivalry established the template for competitive greatness in sports. The idea that to become legendary, you need a worthy enemy. You need someone who pushes you past comfort, past skill, past even desire, into something that looks less like sport and more like purpose. Kobe needed Shaq. LeBron needed the Spurs. Warriors needed the Cavaliers. Jordan needed the Pistons. Every great dynasty in NBA history since has been shaped, directly or indirectly, by what was built in the fire of those years. The physicality, the mental toughness, the organizational discipline, the refusal to lose even when losing is the easier option, and the rules. Don't forget the rules. The flagrant foul classifications, the clarified definitions of excessive contact, the protections that today's players benefit from, they exist because this rivalry went places the sport wasn't ready for. The most brutal rivalry in NBA history didn't just produce great basketball. It produced the conditions for every great basketball moment that came after it. That's the real story. That's the legacy. And honestly, we're still living in it. Every team you love today, every dynasty you root for, carries a little bit of Detroit's defiance and Chicago's obsession in its DNA. So the next time you watch an NBA playoff game and you see a player take a hard foul, get up, say nothing, and hit the next shot. You're watching Michael Jordan's ghost. And somewhere, Isaiah Thomas is watching it too, and whether he admits it or not, he knows he helped create that moment. That's the game within the game. And that is why this rivalry, ugly, brutal, brilliant, will never, ever be forgotten.
What you make that